Welcome back. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi. We're talking about Paul, the mystery man, Paul the apostle to the Gentiles. What exactly was gnawing at him? Why did he go to such lengths in his letters to explain this relationship of believers to the law of God? Why was it that Paul kept using the terms Jew and Gentile repeatedly in his letters? What message was he trying to get across to us? Was there something that was true in his day that we seem to have lost in our day, or that we don't fully understand in our day in our Christian communities, that would aid us in understanding what Paul is really talking about? Well, I believe that there is. And unfortunately, I don't think that we've done a good job in our Christian communities in explaining this concept to our church members, our students of the Word. And so we owe it to ourselves to go back into Paul's letters and study them afresh, especially with the recent discoveries that we've made in archaeology and in literature and in just in resources. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But before the break, we were talking about this idea called covenantal nomism. Covenantal nomism, what is that? Fancy term, right? E.P. Sanders is a Christian author, and he wrote a book entitled Paul and Palestinian Judaism back in 75. I'm sorry, it was back in 77, I believe. And I pulled a quote from his book on page 75 where he describes covenantal nomism. He's actually the one who's credited with coining this term. Let me read that definition again. Covenantal nomism is the view that one's place in God's plan is established on the basis of the covenant, and that the covenant requires as the proper response of man his obedience to its commandments while providing means of atonement for transgression, end quote. Now, let me just say it in my own way, okay, in case that doesn't seem to make sense to you. Basically, what E.P. Sanders is trying to teach is that the first century Judaisms of Paul's day held this idea that God extended covenant membership to them as a people group, the people of Israel. Remember the story back in Exodus chapter 19? They all came to the foot of the mountain, Mount Sinai, and God spoke the Devarim, the Asrat Hadvarim, the 10 words. And God had Moshe write these words on the Luchot, the Shnei Luchot, the 2 tablets. In this ceremony, a covenant was being ratified. God was saying to Israel, I want to take you to my own as my bride. I will be your God, you will be my people. In that collective and corporate covenant, the people of Israel realized that God was making an agreement with them like no other people group on the earth. Thus the term covenant. The word nomism stems from the Greek word nomos, which is usually defined as law. Many times it refers to the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, the Chumash. However, the word can literally mean just Greek law or whatever law, whatever legal code that we're referring to, but most often context determines that it is referring to Mosaic law. Covenantal nomism, then, is the belief that my position in the covenant is stipulated by my obedience to the commandments spelled out by the covenant. I retain my covenant membership by my allegiance to the commandments spelled out and the stipulations spelled out in the covenant. I do not earn my membership by keeping these commandments. I maintain my membership by keeping these commandments. Do you see the subtle difference? Israel of the first century, and I might add Israel of today, they don't feel that they have to earn their way into the covenant. Why not? Because God cut a covenant with Am Yisrael collectively at Har Sinai, at the Mount of Sinai. Therefore, they didn't have to earn their way in. They simply were born into it as Jewish members of this covenant that God cut with the Jewish people. And so this is the blindness of covenantal nomism. Because while it is true that God cut a covenant with Israel, and that he established them as a special people group among all the other peoples of the world, it does not automatically mean that this covenant membership is genuine and lasting. That's the danger of covenantal nomism. Israel enjoys covenant status on a limited basis. What's that limited basis? Provided she remains faithful to the covenant giver, God himself. But within the promises spelled out in this covenant, God anticipates that each individual Israelite would matriculate towards faith in the coming Son of God himself. Are you beginning to catch the picture? God envisioned that genuine and lasting covenant membership can only be secured by the individual Israelite who eventually places his faith and trust in the promised word of the Lord to come, namely Messiah Yeshua himself. So genuine and lasting covenant membership is extended only to the individual who comes to this decision. On a limited level, covenant membership is granted to those who are simply members of the covenant with Israel, whether they have faith in Yeshua or not. But that's not where it was supposed to end. God envisioned that every individual Israelite would eventually, again, graduate towards faith in his promised Son, whom he was going to send, whom was spoken about in the prophets of old. So covenantal nomism has its roots in truth, but it has a dangerous flaw in that it believes in automatic, automatic passive righteousness, a righteousness that is to be equated with salvation, if I were to use church parlance today. So we go back and look at Sanders' definition. This has it has huge implications for one's understanding of first century Judaism, and thus for one's interpretation of Paul and how we interact with it. If covenantal nomism is true, then when Jews spoke of obeying commandments, or when they required strict obedience of themselves and of fellow Jews, it was because they were keeping the covenant. It was not out of legalism. They were not trying to earn their way into a salvation position. From their limited scope of things, or their perspective, their ethnic status granted to them at birth was grace. Now, if you're listening carefully to what I'm saying, you'll understand that that is a misapplication of grace. It is a measure of grace, but it doesn't capture the full scope of God's grace in that the Jewish person is not automatically saved. Covenantal nomism has a danger of giving the Jewish person that false security that he's automatically saved. And I'm here to tell you right now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying to you. Covenantal nomism cannot automatically save you. Only personal faith in Yeshua, the promised Messiah, who has come, who has died, who was crucified, who was buried, who was resurrected, and has ascended to the Father, his ministry, his intercession for us, his infilling of the Spirit, only that can provide genuine, lasting salvation for any individual, whether Jew or Greek, who places his faith in this individual. Being born a Jew does not automatically save you. Being born a Jew has its advantages, okay? But it does not automatically save you. We'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the show here, but stay with us, okay?